Hello, hello. I'm Punar Givanch, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we're super excited to be chatting with Sloan Leo. Leo is the founder and chief executive officer of FLOX Studio, a community design and strategy studio that supports mission driven organizations to animate the practice of their values. Using facilitation, FLOX Studio engages innovative social impact leaders to collaboratively design their culture, strategy, and organizational development efforts. Rooted in Black feminist theory, Afrofuturism, and social justice, FLOX is on a mission to improve the embodied experience of social impact workers and the institutional communities they comprise. Appointed the inaugural designer in residence at the School of Visual Arts Design for Social Innovation Master's Program, Leo has over 15 years of experience with social impact management and community design. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we have the absolute great pleasure of speaking with Sloan Leo. This has been long in the making, so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Sloan is the founder and CEO of FLOX Studio. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, I'm very psyched to be here. This has been a long time in the making, which I assume means it's going to be excellent, just like it's been marinating. We've been getting ready for this energetically, and now we're here.
Exactly. I love the setup. All right, now we need to deliver. But Sloan, please tell us more about yourself for our audience.
My name's Sloan Leo. My pronouns are they, he, and I'm from a small suburb outside of Albany, New York called Latham. And I grew up there. I did not go to high school there, but I went to college there at the University of Albany. A story that seems somewhat irrelevant because I'm 40 and no one cares where you went to college at this point. But Albany and the college I went to is home to a lot of really amazing social justice organizers. And a critical part of understanding who I am is knowing that is where I'm rooted. I grew up with mentors like Barbara Smith. Harvey Milk and Marsha P. Johnson went to my college way before me. So I've always been someone who's just oriented towards the power of community and collective action. And my work in design is really just community work that I understand through design as a language now. And I've been running my studio, FLOX Studio, for the last 3.5 years to really connect community and design. And in many ways to do something that I'm incredibly excited about right now, which is to queer design. And I'd say right these days, my biggest question is, how can we queer design? What does it mean to queer design? And is queering design going to make the world and the communities that we're a part of stronger, healthier, and thriving for more people?
I love that. So can we elaborate on that? What does it mean to do queer design?
Yeah, and so I'm gonna give a kind of clarification to say it's like there's a quote from Bell Hooks that defines queer in a really beautiful way. She talks about queer as not about gender or sexuality, but about the relationship you have with the world that perhaps is at odds with you. And this idea that we are existing in worlds, in buildings, in intellectual, social, and organizational environments where if you are other in some way, and all of us are othered somewhere, that otherness should be a site of information and insight. It can reveal to us what we're talking about here, which is like, well, what's wrong with, right?
Yeah.
It's one way into that conversation. And I look at queering design first through the lens of where are we starting? And so much of design, as far as when I entered the world of design thinking, was through human-centered design, right? Like I was working in a nonprofit and had been doing so for 15 years, different nonprofits, not the same one.
Mm-hmm.
And I was running these board meetings, these global board meetings for the Environmental Defense Fund. They're like a $500 million nonprofit. They have 800 employees. So like, don't think mom and pop nonprofit.
Yeah.
I was coordinating these meetings that would have 150 people at them, and it was experience design, but I had no language for that. it was collaboration and strategy, and I didn't have language for that. And so I really found human-centered design to be helpful, but the outcomes were so focused on like inputs being like, what does the individual need? It was kind of like human-centered, like one person portions of design.
Right.
But when we look at the catastrophe we are all living through for the last 3 years alone, they're catastrophes of the commons and of the collective and of the communal. So the only way we can solve them is actually not through one person scale design interventions. It has to be looking at the entire design process, from research to sprints to testing and pilots to evaluation, all with the question of how does this work better together? And how do we move from design for through design with to the place where we've built capacity and we call it design by? That to me is a queered process.
I love so much of the things you're saying right now, because I also feel like it's shedding light to some areas that I feel like are the underlying reasons of why we see maybe some of the challenges today. You first mentioned well, first of all, like you were saying, like you're doing community work and now understanding through design, and then you mentioned design as a process, and it's showing that actually design is a process that should be serving communities and together with communities, right? So in that sense, I think that's a beautiful description of how like everything is like coming together. And then in queer design, you mentioned otherness, and kind of also pointed out to maybe some of the shortcomings of, I think, having only a human-centered design approach, where a singular human, even though it's great to acknowledge human behaviors and human mindsets in order to inform design, where we are creating solutions for the commons, right? Everything that we're experiencing everything that we're creating is going out into a world of diverse complexities and volatilities and uncertainties, right? Like nothing is set in stone, and if anything, it's full of all the otherness, and therefore it kind of starts helping us create a framework that is more sustainable in where we're like operating right now. And I think we often say expose yourself to something that you don't know, or get outside of your comfort zone, and in those moments, like, you start innovating. I almost like see it as such, right? Like if you acknowledge all the otherness, or everything different than what you are, there's a higher chance that it would actually like survive in an environment, or really become resilient in an environment that is such rich of all the differences and nuances of human beings, rather than one singular human. And I think like so much of the stuff that I mentioned here, and design as a process, which I feel like, we're both educators, and that's something that I often highlight to students too, because I don't think design thinkers have the luxury to just exist in the design space. If design is a process, right, we have to understand that this has research element, this has probably community engagement element, this has understanding of maybe how to commercialize or onboard other stakeholders element, right? It's a much bigger ecosystem that we need to operate in, which the community work really empowers and ups our skills to be able to do so. But when we kind of interact in today's world with many, I would say like corporations, right? Once we mention community work, community engagement, in the built environment, for example, this is sometimes perceived as, oh, like, do you mean community board hearings? Like, yeah, we do those. Or sometimes we're redirected to HR as if this is only an HR thing, right? Like it is the perception around, and this is, I guess, like my question to you on like, what are you observing out there today? Like some of our observations, that the perception is very much that is this a soft skill? Like, is this like, is this an HR thing? Or yes, we're doing listening. Oh yeah, we do focus groups. Or yeah, we did send out a survey, so there's a lot of like misconception around what even community work is and how it should be like kind of integrated into the process, and almost which forcefully puts it in a position of nice to have. Whereas it is so fundamental to realize just everything that you were like talking about, right? I know that was a mouthful, but where I'm getting at is like, what type of perceptions are you also observing that kind of gets in the way of this productive work methodology, I would say?
Pinar, I really love the terms you were using, in particular, this idea of resilience. My friend Julia Paris is a creative director and photographer who invited me to be in their annual magazine this year. And they said, I want, the theme is resilience. You're so resilient, and I would love for you to be able to, we take some photos and do a short essay and talk about this. And I really balked. I was like, I don't want to be resilient. I have to be. I am annoyed by this question. I am, no. And I rejected it, but like, we're very close friends, and so I knew what her intent was. And resilience, what I've come to sit with is that resilience is essentially like how we continue to move while we navigate that which burdens us and that which frees us. So it's like a process of contorting to go
Right.
with what's going on. And I think about a word that comes to mind a lot is durability. And in the built environment, right, like you're building for 30 years, for 100 years, right? You're trying to build fortified, strong foundations of things that will last. Another word I want to pick up on is this idea, and one thing I feel like I'm operating against a lot is traditional notions of efficiency. When we move into the workspace, capitalism's like definition of efficiency is it was done faster.
Right.
And it's based on this idea that there's a set of like mechanics or technologies that can create a faster outcome. Real true efficiency is relational. And people, there's a, that kind of common saying that, this work moves at the relationships move at the speed of trust. But it is the relational efficiency that I am much more interested in. And that highlights the importance of the process. The process is pointing to temporality. And the reason there is I think, resistance to a lot of this way of working isn't just a like performative naivete of like, but we already do that. We have focus groups. But it really is a resistance to slowing down. And I would even say like a resistance, some of which is conscious, but not all of it. We live in a time where we've all, speaking as like an old millennial, like everything was about more, faster. Like I think there's literally every management book in the 90s was like bigger, faster, better, stronger, harder, faster, right?
Yeah, the motto.
Yeah. And nothing was like, what do we do when we're moving too fast? What do we do when we have too much information and we don't have ways of sorting it? How do we metabolize what's going on? And so coming back to this question of like, what kind of is getting in the way, I want to take a moment to talk about in the way of what, to make sure you and I can be on a shared page, if that's okay.
Yes.
So when I say querying design, I think of it as having maybe 8 or so tenets. And this is work that I'm thinking through actively. So this is where I am today. By the time you release this podcast, I'm sure I will have moved somewhat forward, but these I feel solid about. So querying design means to be centered in care. And care is not soft. Care is often structural. Care is not just the presence of nice things. It's also like removing harm and showing care. Like that's what creates safety. It's both. Querying design is,
Hold on a second. Oh my God, that was so good. Someone's ringing the door, which never happens at this time. Like,
it's okay.
let me make sure it doesn't happen again. I wonder if that I didn't have to interrupt you because the audio is recorded separately, but that was so good.
Careful.
I didn't want to be. I think it was an error. Oh my God, I'm so annoyed. Anyway, I'll mute when you're like starting from, you started with centered in care. I think let's start with that first step so that we don't mess the flow. And I'm going to mute myself just to be safe while you're going through that.
So to root in what I mean when I say querying design, I mean to say centered in care. We talk a lot in the workplace and in design about safety, and I'm much more interested in the connection around having care and the absence of harm. So it's like offering the good stuff and removing the hard stuff. So querying design is centered in care. Querying design is inherently political, acting as if there is no political or material reality for the decisions we're making as designers is violent, I would say. There's a violence when we pretend that you can build a building and not thinking about accessibility and the physical impact on someone's life, but also the sense of shame that comes from not being able to have a shared experience with your friends, right? And this isn't to make light of violence, but it is to talk about a more expansive understanding of what harm is. So political as in like, are we building collective power or are we not? And that's a pretty simple like question, is like, is this building collective power or is it not? I would say querying design is about being responsive and emergent. So we can't be very pedantic or patriarchal. We have to, or paternalistic. You have to be responsive to that which shows up in the design process. It's about recovering a sense of agency. Oftentimes, you know, there's this writing on design justice principles by Sasha Costanza Cook, and they talk about their experience in the airport and how, as a trans person in a trans body in a cis heteronormative public space, you lose your agency. You don't get to choose how your body is interacted with, held, viewed, critiqued. Queer design is like we're talking about a future that is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary and not so didactic, like this is how we do it, it's not rote. Queering design is non-binary, and our future is desperately non-binary. We have to move towards accepting the complexity and not always trying to reduce it to these simple finer moments. It's relational and not transactional. And it embraces ambiguity. So when I ask myself, what gets in the way of all of those? In many ways, it's the performance that we're not living within a capitalist system and that we're not all struggling with it. There's very few people that will listen to this that are, I would be put in the category of like ruling class elites. Most of us have to work.
Right.
And so I'm not saying that you have to be an anti-capitalist. I am personally identify that way, but that's where there's conflict, is it seems like community stuff is like not so good for capitalism in some way, and it doesn't work well together. So we're having to navigate that tension in reality. And you can do that and still survive capitalism and have enough money to take an Uber and to get your nice whatever, insert object here. But if we can't really talk about some of the conditions we're all living within in a racialized capitalist situation, that seems to be a big obstacle.
Also, it's just like completely ignoring like a giant elephant in the room.
Yeah, in the room.
And like, oh yeah, let's like innovate, you know, like how is that even possible if you don't acknowledge the reality, right? It only can happen through exclusion, through like messing up. And I would also argue like, yes, faster, but at the same time, I feel like we have enough historic data to show us that when you go faster, that doesn't mean you always like profit or do it right. Or, you know, like there are so many examples. And also like faster how? Because corporations also today are so inefficient in answering by answering the wrong problems, first of all, right? And then after and spending so much time in trying to answer the wrong problems, and therefore also losing a lot of money if we want to look at it at a capitalist lens. But
if I add more thing, Pinar, which is there's I am an anti-capitalist, and I don't believe that capitalism is going to save us at all. And I will say that capitalism desires to control, right? And control takes a lot of energy. And if we want to liberate better design, it's actually about distributing the ownership. And that allows things to move faster. It allows them to move more smoothly. It gets better outcomes. It's more durable. And it solves for more issues. Because everyone's going to peace. And we see that in workplaces. I just want to note this. This isn't all doom scrolling. It is there are many, many examples that when people who are working for a Macy's, a small business, a whatever, when they have the chance to be in a collective process, if you're a consumer and you're part of the making of the product, doing that together ultimately leads to increased value for more people. Simple.
Yeah. 100%. And I would even say that at this point, if we were to do a survey today and all whether or not you believe in capitalism or not, but if you're working for corporate, let's say US, right? If we were to do a survey among all, people working in these corporations, I'm sure many of them will highlight many inefficiencies, right? So to me, then it's also almost protecting the status quo or not getting out of comfort zone, or how there's this saying, nobody gets fired if you buy an IBM or something, right? Not by basically not trying something new or a new brand or working with a startup. I think that, because what you said in terms of efficiency is relational, I think that's so powerful, because in the end, no matter what problem we're trying to address, right? Whether that's a global health crisis or climate change or, discrimination, every space that we try to innovate with, it calls for human processes, right? And even if we have AI helping us 80% of the time and we all become Iron Man with Jarvis, right? We will still have humans creating these processes. And so everything that we're doing is also operating on in relation to everybody else. And when we look at innovation projects too, I would argue many of at least this is in my experience, right? In many of the projects we see, one project gets stopped or doesn't continue or remains as concept. Typically the innovation itself is not the problem, right? It's the system that we're trying to operate and gets in the way. And that could be as simple as maybe poor communication, not effective collaboration, right? In fact, collaboration is such a loosely used term now, we don't even know what we mean by it. I think I would argue we really need to everything that you've broken down in terms of what querying design is, we need that as kind of not only just a guideline for corporations, but actionable steps, methods, processes, work streams that need to be created for each of these elements within the corporation to make sure we move forward. Because I what you're listing here is not only creating more resilient outcomes, but also I would say it's hedging risk. If we really want to speak finance language, it's hedging risk of not messing up or creating something that is completely irrelevant by the time it launches, because we live in such an ambiguous and volatile world, right? I mean, there's a term for it. They call it VUCA. Everything that you're listing here is addressing to that. And which is why, I think as someone in this space, you're kind of it's mind-boggling when it's seen as a nice to have or something that will slow us down, or oh, that is our, I don't know, a corporate responsibility or foundation arm looks into that, as if this is a charitable work, right? That's I think we, in that sense, how we need to really reframe this conversation of engagement of communities or working with people, is to really do you want to remain relevant, right? Do you want to create solutions that will stick? Do you want to be able to innovate in a day and age where like everything is changing every 5 seconds, right? Like I think we really need to kind of, and this is, I guess, like all design thinkers and designers who want to work in this space, right? Like going out into the practice, how do we position ourselves and how do we also advocate for these changes? And I think we kind of need to, and I know it's not fair, and I sometimes get in this like conversation with our team or students too, like, oh, then why do designers have to speak others' language and others don't speak like design language? I'm like, yeah, sure, I agree with you. But I also feel at least responsibility. I would love to get your thoughts on this, to be able to have what we're saying here resonate with finance, resonate with marketing, resonate with supply chain, resonate with developers, so that we could actually start implementing these and push for change, even if it's like in small steps. So yeah, would love to get your thoughts on kind of like, yes, we're queering design and everything that goes within that is so much powerful and multidisciplinary work, right? So how much of like, what is our role there as designers, design thinkers, and how do we most effectively navigate that?
Our role needs to be one of modeling new ways of being together. In the work with a lot of our clients, I play the role of lead facilitator, a role that I love and have inherited both from my grandfather. My grandfather was a minister. My mom was a facilitator. My dad was a facilitator. I didn't know that till I was older, and I was like, I'm a facilitator, and they're like, so are we. I was like, oh, cool. So like learning more about what needed to be modeled though is the like taking the time to be in right relationship with each other. I think some of the modeling fits in a few categories. There's like modeling how to set the stage for community work, because a lot of people resist this type of work because it doesn't feel clear on the next step, right? Like if you went and got your MBA and now you're the head of marketing and sales for a carpet tiling company that's global, you're like, what do you mean set the stage for community engagement? I don't know how to do that.
Yes.
So one way that you can set the stage if you're that person is to think about, could I get a little more community input on the planning side of this project? And that could look like going to a junior colleague and asking for their opinion. It could look like having a lunchtime talk where you talk about what your hope is for the project and ask others to share their ambitions, right? The advanced version of that is doing a power analysis of like who's at the table, how is this ecosystem developed, but maybe we're not there yet, right? The second thing that we need to model for folks is like how to talk to people. The big thing that people take away from working with our studio that always shocks me is this thing called human hello. At the start of every Zoom or every meeting and every call, we spend 10 minutes with people in pairs just asking, how are you showing up today? What's going on for you? That's it. And people are like, revolutionary. And I'm like, this is so I'm like, is that, oh darn, we are starting with a low, okay. But it's good. People feel good about it. So I feel good about it. But I'm also, I want more for us. But if the first step that we want to model for folks who again are like the VP of sales and marketing for a carpet tiling company that's global, is start your meeting by asking people to spend a minute in a Zoom breakout and say, how are you doing? Right. The next thing is really modeling for folks, how do you collect the dots? Designers are excellent at connecting the dots. We are systems thinkers. Yeah. So if we want people to, again, we're trying to move, not like we're not trying to get communities to move design by, they are already doing it. We're actually trying to get corporate and institutional actors to understand what that means and to practice it in their own right. So collecting the dots or connecting the dots is about understanding what emerges from the collective. And that can feel hard. Like, how do you make sense of all the feedback you've gotten from a new round of stakeholders? And having a mapping exercise, something simple, like we see design people with Post-its all the time, right? You're the guy who runs the carpet, sales, for our example now. If you have a meeting and you ask everyone for their one bit of idea, they put it on a Post-it, you put those Post-its on a table, and then you all look at the table together at the same time. And then you go, it looks like there's actually 4 things we all care about. It's 100 post-its, but it's actually 4 themes. Now you're learning together, and learning together strengthens the bonds and builds efficiency. It also retains your employees, and it builds for a better team experience. So you get better recruitment, better retention, and actual collaboration, which happens by learning things together. And then the last thing that I think is actually the most important piece for designers to model is how to try things out. De-risking innovation, making it more democratized inside your organization or institution, is where testing out ideas needs to be not so precious and not so risky. So some of that we do in design, like there's a reason the Post-it is around still. All of us are like, I don't need to see any more design print pictures of people with Post-its on a wall. I can't stand it. That's because we're designers, we're aesthetics, we want new aesthetics. But the reality is it's such a non-precious piece of material. So you can try something out. So when you're looking at designing with new people, like a corporate partner for a new build you're doing of a museum or whatever, how can they get a taste of an idea they've had with you that doesn't feel super expensive, that only takes a week, right? Like, we're running strategic planning with the New School, which is a community of 14,000 people. And we need to run in the fall alone about 200 people through a futuring workshop. I could spend a week of our team's time building out the most complicated Miro or collective workspace online to get virtual engagement. Or I can be like, if you're at home, do you have a piece of paper and something to write with? I don't care if it's a lipstick tube. Draw me a picture of what you want the New School futures to be in 2030. Pretend you're in a time machine, get out of the time machine, you're on a new version of the planet. It's 2030, what's happening at the New School? What are people saying? What do you hear? What do you see around you? What does it feel like? Draw me a picture of that. If you can't draw a picture, take these color forms and make some squares and make it abstract. You know what I mean? We need to model accessible imagination for people who are not naturally or inherently creative. They struggle and they get scared. But if we could test things better in collective, now we got designers speaking regular, like layman's terms, and we got regular people speaking design terms, and we are having fun. We're having some fun.
I love like everything here because it's just so human, right? I think we're almost like sometimes, and I see this like also among like architects too. I feel like we have it coming sometimes because like we create such elitist languages out of like one time like our project was being featured in an exhibition and the curators wrote a description for our project. I couldn't recognize our project. I'm like, are they talking about us? Like what is this? Like it was so, there was so much like just vocabulary that I don't understand, and it's our project, you know, like, and you're kind of like, why? Like why are we doing this? And there's almost like this idea of like, oh, if we make the language more accessible, we're dumbing it down, but not really, right? Like we're only just saying like everybody's welcome. And you start like everything that you're talking about are so human, like the human hello, just allowing for safe to fail experimentation, which is life itself. Like if you look at an individual's life, like how many times do we make a mistake, right? And then we grow from that. And thankfully we are doing mistakes so we can learn from that, right? Like it is so crucial also for like evolution or like to continue to grow and learning together, like spending that time together and like witnessing that like sense of the growth of sense of ownership and belonging that might come with that. And I think these are such universally understandable concepts for just human beings because we should just relate to these, right? I think one thing that you mentioned there, connecting the dots, and I feel like we have to also like emphasize this for like designers too. And as in earlier, like when you were talking about design as a process and it starts with like research, the importance of synthesis, right? And how we cannot be lazy about that because in corporations, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, piles of data is being sat on and we don't like, what do we do with these, right? Like, where do we move on from these? And this could be like market research, this could be interviews, this could be so much stuff, but how do we synthesize these and how do we move on from those? Or in design processes too, I see in, these are like design studios, architectural studios, contextual research sometimes is followed by ideation. And I'm like, wait, what are we moving? Like, what are the actions here? Like, what did we identify? And then, so we jumped into ideation, right? Like it's sometimes forgotten. And I feel like it's almost like something you can't really teach. It's a muscle that you need to like work so it gets stronger over time. And the more we do it, the better we will get at it. And if you don't practice that muscle too, then you have a bigger problem. Then you have pile of data points and you don't know what to do with them, or your research does not really inform the design, right? Or you're not carrying on all that like human engagement that happened also in the research process into the later on into the process. And so on synthesis, any like recommendations you have, because this is an area that I also very much highlight to all my students and really spend a lot of time in, like, how do we generate actionable insights, right? From what we're hearing, what we're seeing, how do we generate actionable insights? Any recommendations that you would give at that point, for that point of design process?
Yeah, my answer always is bring it back to the people. So we had a project recently with a major national nonprofit that's working to end food insecurity on college campuses. And they have a pretty solid fundraising track record, a really interested board, staff who care about each other and the work. And they're at this inflection point to say, are we doing everything we can? Can we do something differently to have a greater impact? And so there's this idea of a theory of change. Like, how do you think, what activities, what resources do you have? What could you do or activities with those resources? And then what change would that lead to, right? That's a theory of change. And they, like a lot of organizations, can get really like data overwhelmed and also data like obsessed. Not just this organization, but like organizations. And you find yourself at this place where you're like, I have all this information, but again, I can't synthesize it. So what we did is we sat with them over the course, each group, the staff and the board separately, for 3 hours. We went over what is a theory of change. We mapped out all the things we knew about what resources they had, what activities they were doing, what outcomes they were getting. And then we sat down and talked about how they felt about them, things that were new, what did we miss, what's been happening in the last few years, what else is happening in the field, what the organizations they look at. So we got all this data in the room, in the conversation. And then together we said, what are we all seeing? It was 45 minutes. That's all we're asking for. Once a month, ask your team, what did you learn? Or what data do you have that you think we can make a sense of together? And that makes it's like, many hands make for light work, and like many minds make for durable work and for clearer work. So that's a lot of where I see collective synthesis happening more effectively. And we're lucky to have AI and technology, right? Like, brief story of Pinar is that when I first started off in my career, I was a policy analyst for Albany County. I worked for the Department of Education policy team. And I am now old enough to say that the way we got data is that instead of doing a Google search, because like that wasn't a thing quite yet, my boss would have me go get every paper from the tri-state area at the local like paper shop downstairs. Wow. I love this aging story right now. I have to physically cut out headlines that had to do with education in New York State, tape them on a blank piece of paper, and then photocopy that, and then collate it, and then send the headlines around. Okay. I'm really excited about AI. We've come a very long way. So if AI wants
every day, Sloan, maybe that was better.
I am not a Luddite. I do love technology's ability to help us go through large data, but I think it needs to be a dialogue between us and the data synthesizers, which might be technology. Yeah. So what I would love to see in the future, like what's right with it, would be, I have this hunch. I have some data now that says this hunch is in the right, like I'm hot or cold on the hunch. and then I can do more relational work, and then I can get more big data. So it needs to be this conversation, a partnership, a relationship between us and technology. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but I need to say this. I spent some time when everyone started getting on Chat GPT, and I was like, I don't get it. And my partner was like, that's how we get old, be careful. And it is the dismissal of new technologies by those of us who feel intimidated that is partly what ages us. And when I started doing, I downloaded a Chat GPT app for my phone, and I was on a plane, Delta, thanks for the good Wi-Fi. And I got obsessed with it because I thought it felt like I was talking to someone. And that relational ability, like the language ability, even though it's not all perfect right now, to have that kind of interface really opens up a new era in community design and in queer design that I'm really excited about. And I don't know exactly how it's all going to work, but there is a there, particularly for organizations that are already at scale.
I 100% agree. I identify as an AI optimist. And yes, like obviously everything comes with its own set of vices, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't have conversations around preparation of like what might happen, right? And like how do we plan and prepare for that, which I don't think is happening enough. But at the same time, I'm so excited that, especially if we're acknowledging that we're like operating in a capitalist system, all the areas that we need to speed up in, that we might need help by AI, that it can like support us. And therefore we can leave more time to strategize, to curate conversations, to say hello, to have time for a human hello, really, and have AI like support us in the back end and all the things that we need to really like speed up in. So in that sense, I definitely agree with you. It shouldn't be seen as like something threatening. If anything, it could help us really take in this diverse set of data. And I don't think AI at this day and age, like today, is a great synthesizer. I think it's a great summarizer, but at the same time, it will help us kind of like interpret diverse like data so quickly, so that we could create multidimensional insights, which is hard for us, right? Although, to your point, taking it back to the people and collectively synthesizing, and you said 45 minutes a month, right? Like this is something that we can all commit to, does do wonders. But at the same time, I think AI could also really help us like strengthen our synthesis muscles, for us, right? Like because we'll be getting the support.
And the term that comes to mind, or the opportunity that I see for us, AI and generally speaking in this conversation, is design and community, and like queer design represents an opportunity for us to make meaning together. And that feels really special right now and really needed.
I think that's going to be the title of the episode. that was amazing. I do want to be mindful of our time, so I know I can talk to you all day, but I have to ask you, for anyone who wants to push boundaries, make progress in any space, what would be your advice to them?
Orient towards that gives you joy, and when you find yourself not there, turn around.
Amazing. I feel like I wish somebody told me this.
We also just crying at the end of the podcast, like, I didn't know.
Because it's simple yet so sophisticated. You're not saying like, I mean, yeah, you might be working hard towards all of that, right? But at the same time, listening to you as you're like doing and navigating all, so powerful. So
It's cool.
thank you, Sloan. This was amazing. Can we do this monthly?
Yeah, I'm down. If you want to, I'm in.
And that is this week's episode of What's Wrong with the Podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Links can be found in the episode description, and you can also find them on our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz. If you found value in the show, we would appreciate if you could rate us and leave a review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget to join us next week. Thank you for listening.